Coming up on Front Porch Politics.
Floyd! Floyd!
A year after protests and riots, we're catching up with some of the people we met during our coverage.
I'm still king from Shaw Road, you know. Don't let all the stuff downtown fool. This is me.
We'll meet Keem Jones from Fayetteville, a story with many chapters.
My sister was murdered.
Downtown Raleigh, Fayetteville Street right now.
In Raleigh, we'll meet one of the teenagers who helped lead protests in the capital city.
And I just remember feeling angry.
We'll find out if his push for change has led to results.
Are we in a better place a year later than we were?
And in Moore County, we try to reunite two people we met in line at the North Carolina funeral for George Floyd.
And we have to come together to bring unity.
Chance encounter led us to Jesse Wimberly's farm.
This is one of my prized possessions.
And an incredible story of its own. Welcome to a special edition of Front Porch Politics. I'm Tim Boyum. It was a year ago this week that I was here in downtown Raleigh when protests and riots erupted, not only in the capital city, but in other cities across the state and the country. And I was there in Rayford a week later when the body of George Floyd arrived for his North Carolina funeral. We're going to catch up with some of the folks that we met along the way. And I'm going to try to find a store owner down the street that I interviewed when his store was ransacked. It was a raw and emotional interview. But we start in Fayetteville with Keem Jones. He made a simple social media post that helped start those protests there, but it's just one chapter in a book full of them.
1360 Davis Street, man.
Down this rocky road with potholes, some the size of a small car, Keem Jones reflects on the place he used to call home.
Probably one of the worst areas in the city, like this area known as the donut hole. You don't want to say forgotten about, but it was forgotten about.
Keem grew up here with his mom, sister, aunt, and cousins, 10 people in all. But it's just his third time back in nearly 15 years.
She was like crying frantically.
At just 18, he found out his mom had cervical cancer. It was 2007, and just months later, the night before Thanksgiving, the phone rang. A call from his sister that made him fall to the floor.
I hear people in the background like, you tell him, you tell him, you tell him. And she just bust out crying, yo, mama dead. And I was like, oh. And I just dropped the phone and my body dropped. Before the phone hit the floor, my body hit the floor. And that was it. That was like, from that moment forward, it was like, yeah, life changed. Pretty much grew up at that moment.
In 31 years, the events that have shaped Keem Jones' life are already enough to fill an autobiography. One chapter over in 2007, an equally tough chapter in 2019. He got another call, not from his sister Keita, but about her, now a 25-year-old mother of 7.
4 days before her birthday, my sister was murdered. They apparently pulled up in the middle of the street, just got the airing out the house. My sister was the only one hit, and she was hit directly in her head. She was holding my nephew and get him out the way when she took this bullet. And there was other kids in the house. Hers, my cousin, they all in the house as these bullets flying. You know? So when I heard the story, it angered me more.
The stories of Keem's mom, his sister, and the stories of this street motivated him last year to start yet another chapter.
It was packed. When I say people all from as far as your eyes can see, it was just people.
May 30th, 2020, a day that again changed Keem Jones' life forever.
Look over the whole crowd, you see J. Cole. I'm like, oh, snaps. It's J. Cole.
It started with a simple Facebook message Keem posted after George Floyd's death that led to hundreds of shares.
Floyd! Floyd!
And later hundreds, if not thousands of people peacefully protesting the streets of Fayetteville.
Do you think you were heard?
Yeah, loud and clear, because that's the day the city stood still.
Keem Jones is pretty soft-spoken, but that day he found his voice, helping lead the protests. Protests that ended here at the Market House, where he was joined by Fayetteville native and world-famous rapper J. Cole.
Instantly, I'm like, don't say nothing crazy, don't say nothing crazy, don't say nothing crazy. But I actually walk up to him and just, you know, we start having a conversation. But then he's like, yo, what are we doing? I'm like, all right. Everybody like, we wanted to go to, they came down here, wanted to go be heard in front of the police station. We all marched to the police station, so imagine this whole crowd of just people everywhere, and people still pulling up, coming down. I guess they done heard what's going on. So you got everybody in the middle of town, so it's like, yo, we just turned and started going this way.
The Market House became a focal point. It sits right in the middle of downtown Fayetteville. Protesters surrounded it. It was even set on fire later that night.
Of course, everybody noticed the Market House. Yeah, they sold a lot of things here, but one of the things was slaves. Me personally, I don't put so much stock in this building. What does hold weight in my life is the people in these neighborhoods over on Shaw Road, Bonnie Doon, Mercy. Those are people that hold the weight in my life, because while we're sitting here worried about this building, which has been here since we was kids, it's people in these neighborhoods that need help.
As we retrace his steps from a year ago, Keem remembers thinking the protest might finally lead to change.
It was a turning point because for a minute, you felt like, okay, they get it now. Now they get it. Now y'all, you watched it, you seen it. And the part that really bothered me about George Floyd's death was, all right, when I looked at pictures of the Crown Coliseum, and I looked at that picture, it's a picture of me, like I'm laid out on the ground, and you got cops on one side, cops on this side, cops right here, all over. And I remember hitting that ground. It triggered me because I remember the feeling of being under them cops. And I can only imagine how he felt at that moment.
So early.
Keem's talking about March of 2016, yet another chapter in his life. Then candidate Donald Trump was at the Crown Coliseum for a rally.
Yeah, we were told to leave because, you know, it was a back and forth between two people. We just kind of got caught in the middle trying to de-escalate the situation. Didn't know we were getting kicked out, but when we found out we were getting kicked out, it was like people started antagonizing.
John McGraw elbowed Keem in the face. Instead of police grabbing McGraw, Keem was taken to the ground while McGraw went back to his seat. McGraw even bragged about it later to Inside Edition.
Did you like the event?
You bet I liked it.
Yeah? What'd you like about it?
Knocking the hell out of that big mouth. We don't know who he is, but we know he's not acting like an American.
So you deserved it?
Every bit of it.
What was that?
Yes, he deserved it. The next time we see him, we might have to kill him.
McGraw was later charged but pleaded no contest and apologized to Keem, which led to this surprising embrace in court. A moment that everyone remembers, but not one Keem wants to define his story.
I'm not that person. My name is Rakeem Jones. I'm a father, community advocate. Simple. I'm not, oh, you're the guy that got hit at the Crown. Like, we know what happened. It's 1,000,001 videos to show you what happened, but that's not me.
Back downtown, Keem wants the next chapter to instead focus on his work to change the community.
What are we protesting for? We protest to get in the conversation. Once you get in the conversation, that's when the real change happens. I feel like the George Floyd verdict was more so, now there's an era of accountability. You know that you can be prosecuted. There's something that could possibly happen. So I feel like in that matter, we're in a better place. But as far as overall, we still have work to do. There's so much work to be done, because now that we've addressed the police problem, what about the economic problem, the health problems, and everything that leads up to you getting involved with the police?
Who knows where Keem Jones' story will take us next, but it will always start here, a place that's now broken and abandoned, but a place that inspired his story in the first place.
I'm still king from Shaw Road, you know. I don't let all the stuff downtown fool. This is me. This is what I do it for because I came up in this house.
Recently, the Fayetteville City Council voted to keep the market house where it is, but repurpose it. The discussion on how to repurpose it is ongoing. In terms of Keem's sister, 3 people were arrested for her murder. That court case is also ongoing. We got to take a break. When we come back, we'll meet a young man who helped lead the protest here in the capital city. He was only a teenager, which might surprise you, but after you see the story, it probably won't. Welcome back to this special edition of Front Porch Politics. I'm Tim Boylan. We are catching up with some of the people that I met along the way covering the protests and riots here in downtown Raleigh and across the state, as well as that funeral for George Floyd that took place in Rayford. This is the Wake County Justice Center. It was one of the hot spots. In fact, I have vivid memories of a tear gas canister zipping past my leg during our live coverage. Now, earlier in the day, there were peaceful protests, partially organized by a 19-year-old. That might surprise you, but after you see the story, probably not.
We want justice! We want peace! We want justice! We want peace!
Somehow the protests from a year ago feel like yesterday and 20 years ago at the same time.
No children! No children!
Protesters across the nation and here in North Carolina taking to the streets days after George Floyd's death was captured on cell phones.
And I just remember feeling angry. I felt like I did after I witnessed the inside of that school shooting in Parkland, Florida, what I call holy discontent, and what my pastor calls righteous anger. I was just furious. That shouldn't happen in the United States of America, but I understand the history and everything that went into that moment on the street in Minneapolis.
Greer Webb, 19 at the time, helped lead the march in Raleigh.
I just remember it being so spontaneous. We had the rally that started out front of the courthouse, and at one point the organizers just made a decision to move, to nonviolently walk and kind of unify the crowd and move throughout downtown Raleigh. We didn't have a planned route or anything like that. We just know that we wanted to make noise and we wanted to march. I think there's something just so inherently powerful about marching when it comes to civil rights and social change, and so we wanted to certainly put Raleigh on the map and show Minneapolis that we stood in solidarity with them.
Greer captured much of the march on Facebook Live.
Downtown Raleigh, Fayetteville Street right now, headed back toward the Capitol. This is a youth-led, spontaneous protest right now.
Now, I'm not sure how you picture a protest leader, but Greer was indeed one of the organizers that day. He was just a teenager, a Moorhead Keynes scholar at UNC Chapel Hill, and a young man full of optimism with $1 million smile. Maybe not what you might expect, but in hindsight, we probably should have expected it.
Yeah, I grew up right in the midst of it.
This is Greer's grandma, Betty Works. She knew early on Greer would do big things. I know, all grandmas say that, but she says something was different about Greer.
Even at dinner with his family, he challenged his dad on the issues of the day, and this was like middle school. He had his opinion on issues of the day, and he would go toe-to-toe with his dad on issues like that, and he always stated his opinions about things. And we took him to the museum once, and he would always go up to the front, and the leader that was explaining the particular artifact to us would ask questions, and he would always answer the questions.
Grammy, as Greer calls her, grew up in Albany, Georgia during the height of the civil rights movement.
I had a brother who insisted on participating in the marches. I had the hand-me-down books with all the curse words and the N-word and written all through them, and of course we had to ride separate buses, and we had everything secondhand. We didn't have as much material.
That family history and those dinner table talks were arming Greer with confidence. In high school, when the Parkland, Florida high school shooting happened, it all came full circle.
I knew that something wasn't right when it came to gun violence, and that was just my launching point into recognizing and fighting against some of these other societal issues that continue to hold people down and threaten lives.
He organized a walkout at his school and held this news conference outside the legislature announcing a town hall.
To those of us currently enrolled in high school, the fear of violence is a daily one, and one that is never far from our minds. With ever-threatening violence on our horizons, We find ourselves searching for answers in systems higher than we are and from people seemingly more powerful than we are.
And he's done it ever since, helping lead protests on that Saturday last May, but also the days that followed with Raleigh Demands Justice, a group pushing for police reform.
Right now, my voice is tired. I was out there on Saturday. I was out there with protesters yesterday on social media, calling folks, talking to folks, making sure that we continue putting the pressure on the state, the city of Raleigh, the capital city of the state specifically, to allow folks to demonstrate peacefully. But y'all, my voice is tired. I want my eyes to be tired from reading policies that are enacted that we're demanding. I want my fingers to be tired from flipping through the pages of policies being told that are going to be implemented to us by city and town councils. I want my ears to be tired by police chiefs, Cassandra Deck Brown in particular, and all North Carolina police chiefs telling me that they are going to fire officers that overuse force.
Twice last month, Greer marched in Elizabeth City after police shot and killed Andrew Brown Jr.
I knew I wanted to go. I wanted to sit and listen and lend my body, lend my feet to their marches and to their movement for change there. And so I think that for so many people that I've talked to, because it happened so close, because it happened in our state, they wanted to do what they can to support this small town community and to reach out and let them know that they are with them, even just by going and saying, here I am, how can I be of service.
We spent this day walking the same path he did a year ago in downtown Raleigh. The same path I walked later that night, reporting on the riots that later followed.
So we'll start throwing things. All right, we're going to back off. Mark, let's go ahead and back off. The police are coming. This is what happens when people they're throwing stuff at the police.
We're left downtown Raleigh before the riots began that night.
Right here in this area was a hot point, kind of a trigger point as we got further into the evening, especially here at the CVS. And I just remember thinking, you know, I really do feel bad for those here that are having to face off against police, that are having to, you know, shelter in place, you know, inside their businesses. But all of this could have been avoided if we had a system that really worked for all of us and if George Floyd hadn't died. And so that's why I think it's important to focus on the future and preventing these events, being preventative rather than reactive, so we don't have to worry about a window, so that we don't have to worry about reporters getting tear gas, so we don't have to worry about police cars getting busted up. I think it's important that we recognize that anger and frustration in America's black communities and work to prevent the events that spark these protests and unfortunately sometimes these acts of violence against buildings and places of business.
Many businesses that are still boarded up or gone, like Kimbrell's Furniture, broken and looted a year ago, now out of business in the site of a makeshift memorial.
Well, you can see here, you know, some of those that have had encounters and unfortunately died at the hands of Raleigh police.
That's one that you mentioned.
Yeah, the George Floyds of Raleigh, they're calling it. I mean, Keith Collins just a few years ago in 2019, right? Sohail Mojarrad. And then, of course, you have Akiel Dinkins. I got to organize with his mother, Rolanda Bird, and get to know her and her family's story. That was 2016. And so these events are happening here in Raleigh. They may look a little different than a George Floyd or Breonna Taylor, but something's got to change so we stop losing our black men and women at the hands of law enforcement.
We met Greer and his grandma at Raleigh's Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Gardens, the first public park in the U.S. that was solely dedicated to Dr. King and the movement. Seemed like the right place to ask the big question.
Are we in a better place a year later than we were?
I don't know if we're in a much better place. I just think we're in a different place. I mean, Dr. King mentioned that an injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And so as long as we continue to perpetuate racism in this country, I'm not sure we're in the best place. I'd actually go as far to say I'm sure we're not in a good place. And so we've got to continue working with grace, continue to forgive, but also hold those in positions of power accountable. And we've got to move toward becoming an anti-racist society.
I feel like we have kind of moved the needle, but not enough. It's just like it's just shaking right where it is, you know. And I feel like we should be in a better place. And many times I think, why? What is the holdup? Why aren't we where we need to be?
But she does know her grandson will keep fighting, whether it's marching or through policy change. A lot to contemplate, but a lifetime ahead at just 20 years old. Greer returns to UNC Chapel Hill this fall. At 20 years old, he's got a lot of options ahead of him, but he is considering law school and perhaps eventually a run for office. We got to take one last break. When we come back, remember that funeral for George Floyd in Rayford? I was there for that too, and we talked to two people in line that really caught everybody's attention. We'll try to reunite them when we come back. Welcome back to this special edition of Front Porch Politics. I'm Tim Boehm. A year later, we're taking a look back at some of the people that we met during our protest and riot coverage here in downtown Raleigh and across the state, and the people that we met in line at the George Floyd funeral in Rayford. I've been trying to catch up with one of the store owners here that we did an interview with live after his store was ransacked. We'll have more on that. But first, I did an interview with a white man and a black woman who were in line at that funeral for George Floyd. It really caught all y'all's attention, and the big reason why was because they had never met before.
The kitchen is a separate structure than the house.
A step onto Jesse Wimberly's farm is a step back in time.
It took me years to find all the wood of the same period. I've actually done a lot of work here. It might not look like it, but I've actually done a lot of work to make it look like the day that it was built.
This Moore County cabin was built 150 years ago.
Originally, we pulled up right here in a covered wagon in 1870, and my family were turpentiners. And if you're not familiar with turpentine, it's made from the sap of the longleaf pine. And we would collect that, distill that down, and sell that like any crop.
And your great-great-grandfather was in the Civil War, right?
Killed at Antietam. And so when he was killed, my great-grandfather, who was 12 at the time, became head of household. So looking for work, there's not much work in 1870, besides you were either in timber or turpentine. And so that's what he went into, as turpentine.
Wimberly fulfilled a childhood dream, taking over the farm in the 90s, restoring longleaf pine and teaching others prescribed burning.
This is one of my prized possessions. So this is my great-grandfather down here in the right-hand corner. And this is opening day on a new turpentine orchard. And they use the term orchard to talk about a tree that's an area, a stand of trees that's never been tapped before.
Jesse's always loved history and adventure. He's never been afraid to chart his own course.
Yeah, after college, I was looking for what am I going to do, and I was standing in a hallway, and I saw a poster, join the Peace Corps, travel, see the world. And I said, that sounds like the deal for me. So I spent the next 3 years in West Africa.
Wow. So what was that like?
Surprisingly enough, it's, a lot of the culture we have here in the South is African. So I carried on a farming tradition in Africa. I would sit around with farmers because that's what I was doing. I was teaching fish farming. And so my day was going out to meet with farmers and talking to them how they could improve, the protein diet in their families.
His world of ventures opened his eyes and led to decades of work as a community organizer.
It used to be well known. Community organizers used to be real common, and where you would probably hear about them the most is labor. All labor, it used to be 30-40% of the United States belonged to a union, and every union had an organizer. So we knew about this, and this is the person who brings people together to look at common goals that we want to achieve.
His work with labor unions and other groups tackled all kinds of issues, including race. So when Wimberly heard Rayford would host a memorial service for George Floyd, he felt compelled to go.
What I'm hearing from communities of color is that they want white folks to show up and recognize what's going on. And I can't stop everything, but I can show up. I can acknowledge what's happening, and I can use my body as a messenger and say, I will make a presence here. I'm going to show up. And so that's what I just felt like when I heard that George had spent time in Rayford. I said, well, I need to go there. It's a community I work in, so I said, I'm just going to go there and show up and have a presence there to say, we see this injustice.
So how'd you meet Gail? I first met Jesse when he was in line to see George Floyd. He was with a woman named Gail Myers from Florence, South Carolina.
Just random. Literally, I didn't realize how big an event that was going to be. I was just overwhelmed. Couldn't get close to the place to park. was going, now what do I do? You know, so I literally had to park a mile away, and I just looked for a business that was closed that day and pulled up. And as soon as I pulled up, you know, a total stranger, Gail pulled up beside me, and she rolled down her window and she said, "Can we park here?" I said, "I have no idea. I don't want to get towed, but why don't we both park here and we'll walk down together and we'll hang out. And if one of our cars gets towed, we can help each other figure this out." She said, "Sounds good to me."
Viewers were struck by this white man and black woman, strangers who spent the day together in line at a funeral and walked away with great optimism.
I want people to understand how this affects everybody. Black, white, it doesn't matter. And we have to come together to bring unity.
I have the video. A year later, I showed Jesse the video from that day.
I've been working on these issues for the past 4 decades, and I gotta tell y'all, as a straight white guy, I am very excited because, as I was telling my new friend here as we walked down the street, never before have white people come up to me and said, "You know what, something's different this time." Yeah, and I would agree with that.
You would still today?
Yeah. So the question would be, what is new? And I mean, I think that is a very important discussion.
You may have noticed we haven't reunited with Gail. Jesse never exchanged numbers, and despite our best efforts, we have not been able to track her down either. But Jesse says it had a huge impact on him.
We both grew up in a world where our trajectory in life, based on our race, was entirely different. And I think we are finally coming to a time where people are seeing that something is not right. They just don't know exactly what it is that needs to be done.
A year later, Jesse feels things are better, but it's just the beginning.
Just the awakening that's happening in this country I've never seen before. You know, I think I said in that interview, I have white folks that come up to me all the time now, you know, and they'll say things to me, they're not going to say anything else. And I've seen a shift out of anger into more frustration. You know, what am I supposed to do with this? So I think there is a moment now where good information might get more traction than it has in the past.
After 4 decades as a community organizer, Jesse's pushing to help white people understand their role.
We take this horrible situation where you're either the perpetrator or the victim. And really, that's where most white folks are getting sideways on this issue. They go, "I'm not a perpetrator of bad things." But it's different. We don't need to be a perpetrator, but we can be complicit. And when we're complicit, that allows the system to move forward.
Remember that prized possession, that picture of his great-grandfather? Take another look. Notice he and another man leading the other men, who are all black.
Let me ask a question here. How is it that 24 men with axes let a couple of guys with a pencil tell them what to do? And if we can figure that one out, then we'll have a lot of answers. But this really kind of encapsulates where there's a lot more people doing the work and a lot fewer people benefiting from the work. And things have not changed that much from this photograph.
A 150-year-old picture sparking conversation today, perhaps inspiring change for tomorrow.
This is what gets me going every day is looking at my history and saying, well, I benefited from it, and now what am I going to do with that benefit that I got? How can I use the information that I know and the privilege that I carry and make the world a better place?
I am still so disappointed that we have not tracked down Gail, but we will keep trying. Speaking of keep trying, I've been trying to track down Muhammad, that store owner here in downtown Raleigh that had his store ransacked during the riots, and I interviewed. It was raw and emotional. I've been texting him for weeks. He hasn't responded. People around here don't know where he is, so we came down to his store, and well, you can see what we have here. The store is closed down. There's a red sign that says the structure has been found to be an unsafe building. That's all the time that we have for this edition of Front Porch Politics. We'll see you again next month for more incredible stories with incredible people here in the great state of North Carolina.